They said the foal wouldn't make it. Not in that heat. Not alone. 3 weeks old, abandoned in the Colorado desert, too weak to stand, too scared to cry. But when an old gray wolf stepped from the shadows, everything changed. He wasn't there to hunt. He wasn't there to watch. What he did next, no one could explain. Because sometimes the wildest miracles don't roar. They lie down beside you and keep you breathing. The storm struck without warning. One moment, the high desert near Grand Junction, Colorado, was still and dry, the air heavy with late summer heat. The next, the clouds burst open like a fractured dam. Wind howled across the red-dusted plateau. Lightning cracked across the open sky with a scream of white fire striking ridgelines and whipping the herd into a chaos of thunderous hooves. Dust spiraled. Rocks shifted. The Mustang herd galloped with wild eyes, fleeing instinctively as rain pelted their backs and thunder rolled beneath their feet. Among them ran a tiny foal, only 3 weeks old, his caramel coat soaked and streaked with mud. His legs, long and uncertain, struggled to keep pace with the thundering adults. In the swirl of bodies and noise, he lost sight of his mother. A single bolt of lightning struck a tree nearby. The crash split the herd in two, and the foal turned the wrong way. His name would later be given as Bramble, but in this moment, he had no name, no direction, and no hope. He wandered alone for hours after the storm passed through sandstone gullies and stretches of sun-blasted brush. The air turned dry again, quickly, the Colorado sky a washed-out blue that offered no mercy. By the second day, Bramble's tongue was swollen, his eyes glazed. He stumbled across cracked clay and ghosted shadows, no longer seeking water, just a place to fall. And fall he did. At the edge of Dolores Canyon, in the shelter of a shallow rock hollow, the foal collapsed. He did not cry out. He simply folded breath-shallow legs, twitching now and then with the final flickers of will. Around him, the desert breathed dust and silence. The high winds had stripped the trees bare. The birds did not sing. All was still, save for the slow rise and fall of Bramble's narrow ribcage. Far off across the ridge, a pair of eyes opened. Ashen had been watching since the storm. The old wolf stood motionless beneath the brittle shade of a pinon tree, his silver coat nearly indistinguishable from the bleached stone behind him. He was a large wolf, his frame lean but strong, though age had bowed his spine and thinned the fur around his ears. A ragged scar ran along his left flank, a memory of battles long past. At 13 years old, Ashen was ancient by wild standards. Once the alpha of a great desert pack, he now walked alone. His amber eyes were sharp, though, still clear, still capable of judgment. Ashen had not eaten properly in days. The rabbits had grown wary, and his limp barely noticeable when still grew more pronounced when he ran. One of his upper canines had cracked last winter, making clean kills painful. He survived now on carrion and memory. But when the wind brought the scent of the foal, weak and near death, something stirred in him. He followed without hunger. Across the rocks and through the gullies, the wolf moved silently, as he always had. He kept his distance at first. Instinct urged caution. But as the sun slid westward, casting long shadows like reaching fingers across the canyon floor, Ashen drew closer. He saw the foal barely breathing. He did not pounce. He did not stalk. He watched. There was no urgency in him, only something quiet. Something old. The same silence that filled him when his last packmate died. The same silence that greeted the canyon every morning now where no other wolves sang. Bramble lifted his head once, just an inch, sensing something. Their eyes met. Predator. Prey. But in that breath of desert wind, nothing happened. Only stillness. Ashen took a step forward, then another. When he stood just 10 feet from the foal, the breeze shifted. It carried with it the scent of others' coyotes, perhaps. Ashen turned his head slightly, nostrils twitching, and then he did something no story had ever told before. He sat. There, under the twilight sky, Ashen sat near the dying foal, silent, alert, and waiting. What he waited for, perhaps even he did not know. The foal coughed weakly. A flutter of dust lifted and settled. Ashen turned his head and noticed a small depression in the rocks nearby, a natural bowl left by rain, filled with a shallow puddle, its edges crusted with sediment. Slowly, the wolf stood. He walked to the puddle, sniffed the water, then dipped his muzzle in. When he lifted his head, droplets clung to his chin. He returned to the foal. He lowered his head and brushed his wet muzzle against Bramble's cracked lips. No response. Again, Ashen walked to the puddle. He soaked his fur in water and came back. This time, Bramble stirred. A flicker of tongue. A faint breath, less ragged. A third time. And on that third return, Ashen stayed. He lay down beside the foal, curling his aging body around the colt's flank, offering what warmth he could. The sun dipped behind the ridge. The desert cooled quickly. Coyotes howled far off, but Ashen didn't flinch. He watched the sky darken, the stars blink into life. And he did not move. The wind quieted. The sand no longer danced. Just a wolf and a foal, and something between them. Something neither had ever known before. The desert sky turned violet as dusk settled like a breath over the Dolores Canyon. Long shadows stretched across the stones. The air grew still, broken only by the rasping breaths of the foal and the soft wind that stirred the brittle sage. The foal Bramble lay as he had before, his legs folded beneath him, head tucked to his chest, eyes half-lidded and dim. His ears twitched with flies, but he didn't have the strength to shake them away. Ashen remained beside him. The old wolf's body curved protectively around the foal's, not touching, but near enough that their warmth mingled. His ears pivoted to the wind, alert for danger. Coyotes often hunted at night. So did bobcats. Ashen knew the silence that preceded such threats. But tonight he listened not for prey. He listened for Bramble's breathing. There was no hunger in him. Not anymore. Not in the traditional sense. Ashen rose slowly. The joints in his hind legs creaked. He walked once more to the rain-fed puddle in the rocks and dipped his muzzle. Then he returned and gently pressed the moisture to Bramble's mouth. The colt made a weak effort to lick a twitch of his tongue that barely reached Ashen's fur. But it was something. A flicker. A refusal to surrender completely. Ashen lowered himself again, beside the foal, watching the stars begin to bloom overhead. Something ancient stirred in the wolf, something that had long slept beneath scars and survival. He remembered once lying beside his own newborn pup, a pale furred thing that hadn't lived through its first frost. He remembered curling around it, trying to share enough warmth, enough breath to stop the cold from stealing it away. He hadn't succeeded then, but maybe this time was different. 15 miles away, Delilah Roan adjusted her dusty ball cap and tightened her grip on the steering wheel. The headlights of her old Toyota Tacoma cut through sagebrush as they bounced along a dirt path leading into the canyon's upper basin. Delilah was 35 tall, with a sharp jawline and sunburned skin. She wore a tan ranger vest over a navy blue shirt, both faded from years of work in the field. Her eyes were a deep hazel, hard to read, but always watching. She had once dreamed of a life in science labs and academic journals, but wild horses had called her elsewhere. For the past 10 years, she had worked as a wildlife biologist specializing in free-roaming Mustangs. Tonight, her instincts hummed with urgency. In the passenger seat sat Cody Vance, her new research assistant. 24, lanky and earnest to a fault, Cody had come straight out of grad school, with a scholarship and a heart too soft for field work. He pushed his glasses up his nose and peered into the dark through a pair of binoculars. "Storm blew through hard 2 nights ago," Delilah muttered. "I've got GPS pings from the main herd north of here, but a foal separated this far south. He won't last much longer." Cody checked his notes. "You think he wandered into the canyon?" "I think he did more than wander," she said. "These rocks can trap even the smartest stallion. For a baby, it's a death sentence." She didn't mention the coyotes, or mountain lions, or the sheer brutality of heat and thirst. They rounded a bend and saw nothing but blackness and brush. Then Cody leaned forward. "Wait. Did you see that, over by the ravine?" Movement. Delilah slowed the truck and turned off the headlights. She grabbed a flashlight and stepped out. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of wet stone. As they advanced on foot, the canyon began to open beneath them like a sleeping mouth. They moved carefully, boots crunching over gravel and broken roots. Then Delilah froze. In the clearing below, half shrouded by shadow and moonlight, lay a foal, barely breathing, but that wasn't what stopped her. Beside it lay a wolf, an old one, not attacking, not stalking, just resting. Ashen lifted his head as the humans approached. His nose caught the scent. First rubber soles, denim metal, sweat, the dust of long travel. His amber eyes fixed on the woman and the boy behind her. He didn't move. Delilah raised her hands slowly, signaling to Cody to hold back. She crouched and whispered, "This doesn't make sense." "What is it?" Cody asked behind her. She didn't answer. Her gaze remained locked on the wolf. Ashen stood then, not to attack, but to shield. He placed himself between Bramble and the strangers, his hackles raised, only slightly more caution than threat. I think he's protecting it," Delilah whispered. Cody's mouth opened and closed again. "That's not... Wolves don't do that." "No," she said. "They don't." Her mind raced. Instinct told her to drive the wolf away to reach the foal. But something deeper, older, told her to wait. She slowly crouched and pulled a small, collapsible bowl from her satchel. Uncapping her water bottle, she poured gently, making sure the sound of the stream didn't alarm the wolf. Then she placed the bowl on the ground and backed away. Ashen didn't move. He looked at the bowl, then at the woman, and then with deliberate grace he picked it up in his jaws and carried it to Bramble. Cody whispered, "Did you see that he brought it to the foal?" Delilah's voice was low. "I saw." Ashen placed the bowl near the foal's mouth. Then he curled once more beside him. They made camp 100 feet away, setting up a small 2-person tent with only essentials. Delilah refused to leave until morning, when she could call in a mobile vet unit from the city. In the distance, Bramble's breathing slowed into a rhythmic rise and fall. Ashen stayed watchful all night, and when Delilah finally lay down beneath the canvas of stars, she whispered into the silence, "I think we're witnessing something no one will believe." But she didn't need them to believe. She only needed it to be true. Dawn had not yet reached the canyon, but a faint light was beginning to outline the distant mesas like ash along the edge of fire. The air had turned cold. A thin mist rose from the stone floor, hugging the curves of the rock as if the desert itself was reluctant to wake. Delilah Roan crouched just beyond a brittle line of creosote bushes, her breath visible in the chill. Cody stood a few feet behind her, nervously shifting his weight between his boots. His binoculars hung loose at his chest, forgotten for the moment. Across the clearing, Bramble lay where he had through the night, still alive but motionless, except for the slow rise and fall of his side. And beside him, as if carved from the canyon itself, lay Ashen, the old wolf, still vigilant. But something was wrong. The stillness had changed. Delilah didn't speak, but she raised one hand slightly, the universal gesture for wait. She tilted her head, listened. The sound came again. Soft, shuffling. Not from their left, not from the canyon floor, but from the ridge above, Cody whispered. Do you hear that? Yes, Delilah said quietly. And it's not us. From the shadows emerged Rhett Corbin, a local rancher in his 50s, with a wiry frame and skin like sun-cured leather. He wore a dark brown duster stained with oil and dust, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed a face built more for suspicion than trust. His boots were heavy loud on the rock. He walked like a man who didn't care who heard him coming. Behind him, two ranch dogs trotted with trained precision, one tan, with black ears the other, a mottled mix of shepherd and husky. They paused when Rhett did sniffing the air. Delilah stood quickly and stepped into view. Corbin, what the hell are you doing out here? Rhett lowered his binoculars and shrugged. Got word from the sheriff's office someone was tracking horses near Dolores. Figured it was you or poachers. Thought I'd take a look. I don't need your help. No, he said with a thin smile. But you might need a gun. He pointed toward the canyon floor where the silhouette of Ashen was now standing. The wolf had sensed the dogs and was rigid, hackles raised. He's not a threat, Delilah said firmly. Rhett scoffed. It's a wolf, Del. They're always a threat. Cody stepped beside her. This one's different. He's been protecting the foal all night. Sure, Rhett said with a drawl. Next thing you'll tell me he's tucking it in and reading bedtime stories. The dogs began to growl low, their bodies coiled with instinct. Ashen responded with a low growl of his own, stepping in front of Brambletail, low but stiff, ready to fight. Call your dogs off, Delilah warned. You'll ruin everything. But Rhett didn't move. You're letting a predator lie next to a dying foal and calling it a miracle. You're scientists. Act like it. Delilah's jaw clenched. I watched that animal bring water to a horse. With intention, not instinct. And you're betting the life of that colt on a bedtime story. The standoff held in the crisp air. Then Ashen did something no one expected. He stepped forward slowly, head low, and gave a single bark, not a growl, not a warning, but a sound of presence. His eyes locked on the dogs. The message was clear. This one is mine to guard. The tan dog flinched. The other held its ground. Rhett, Delilah said again, softer now. Please, stand down. Let us finish what we started. For a moment, the wind answered in place of the man. Then, with a grunt, Rhett gave a sharp whistle. The dogs backed off, growling under their breath but obeying. He said nothing else, just turned and walked back toward the trail, leaving footprints in the dry earth. When the echo of his boots finally faded, Delilah exhaled and dropped to a crouch again. He's going to be a problem. Wasn't he your friend? Cody asked. Once, she said, before he lost his grazing contract and blamed wild horses for it. Ashen returned to Bramble's side, glancing back once at the humans, before settling once more into his silent watch. Bramble stirred, lifted his head a few inches, then let it fall again. I think we're running out of time, Delilah said. She tapped her satellite phone and made the call she had been delaying. The mobile vet team out of Glenwood Springs confirmed receipt of her location and said they'd be on site within the hour. As they waited, Cody prepared the makeshift shelter, laying down thermal blankets near the edge of the clearing. Delilah unpacked her medical kit and set aside syringes of electrolytes and dextrose. At one point, she caught Ashen watching her, not with suspicion, but with something like recognition. The quiet gaze of one being who knew what it meant to try and hold life together when everything around it was falling apart. She thought of Glenn, her husband, a man who died in a flash flood during a field study 5 years ago. A man who used to believe in moments of whiskey, soft honesty that animals could feel more than we understood. She'd scoffed at the time. Now she wondered if he'd simply been ahead of her. Then, at the edge of the ridge, came the thudding beat of rotors. The vet helicopter, Ashen's ears pinned back. Bramble stirred again, this time with panic. It's okay, Delilah murmured. It's help. You just have to hold on. The chopper landed a safe distance away. From it emerged Dr. Evelyn Sato, a veterinarian in her early 40s, with calm brown eyes and a patient expression. She was short, sturdy, and practical, with a clipboard always in hand, and a way of speaking that slowed people's pulses rather than quickening them. "Where's the patient?" she asked without pause. Delilah pointed. "Near the wolf." Dr. Sato blinked. "Excuse me," long story Cody said. "You're not going to believe it anyway." They approached with caution. Ashen stood once again, his body between Bramble and the newcomers. But when Delilah stepped forward and touched the wolf's shoulder with the back of her hand, murmuring gently, he stepped aside. Dr. Sato knelt beside the Foal, checked vitals, and immediately began directing her team to set up IV fluids. "This one's barely hanging on," she said. "But it's not impossible. We'll stabilize him here before transport." The desert sun began its slow ascent as saline dripped into the fragile veins of a colt who should not have survived the night. And nearby Ashen watched his task, not yet complete. Night fell like a slow breath over the Dolores Canyon, painting the world in deep blues and gray shadows. The air turned bitter, the kind of cold that crept into bones, not just skin. The desert, so scorching by day, now whispered a silent threat of frost. Stars shimmered above like forgotten memories, indifferent to the struggle taking place far below. Inside the clearing, the atmosphere had shifted from urgency to something more delicate, hope laced with fear. Bramble lay swaddled in a thermal blanket lined with gauze, an IV line feeding into a vein on his neck. His legs twitched, occasionally unconscious responses to life re-entering a body that had teetered at the edge of death for days. Dr. Evelyn Sato moved quietly between supply crates and the makeshift field station, her gloved hands steady despite the fading light. Her presence anchored the chaos like a calm center. Delilah Roan sat nearby, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around them as she watched the foal. She had barely spoken since the vet team began their work. Every so often her eyes flicked toward Ashen, who remained close, never touching, never interfering, but ever present. Cody Vance, her assistant, sat by the fire they'd managed to coax out of stubborn brushwood. He stared at the flames, but wasn't really watching them. The young man's mind was somewhere between disbelief and reverence. Earlier that evening, he had tried twice to sketch what he'd seen: a wolf shielding a foal from the cold, from death, from everything the world could throw at it. Each time he abandoned the drawing halfway through. There was no capturing what couldn't be explained. Not far from the fire, Ashen stirred. His ears twitched, his posture stiffened. Delilah noticed instantly. "Something's wrong," she said. Dr. Sato looked up from her work. "Vitals are steady. Foal's still with us." "No, not the horse," Delilah said. "Him." Ashen rose slowly. The years weighed heavy in his limbs, but his senses were sharper than any human's. He tilted his head toward the black hills beyond the ravine. Then low and primal came the sound howls. Not one, several. Coyotes. Cody stood, flashlight in hand. "How many?" "Too many," Delilah answered. "He knows." Ashen stepped toward the sound tail, stiff teeth bared in a low snarl. His body curved around Bramble protectively. Dr. Sato began packing up supplies, instinctively tightening loose cords and securing fragile containers. A moment later, 3 shapes broke through the edge of the darkness, slim and fast. Coyotes. More shadows lurked behind them. Delilah reached for the flare gun. "Wait," Cody said, eyes wide. Ashen had taken his place between Bramble and the threat. His legs shook slightly from exhaustion, but he stood tall, head-raised eyes glowing amber in the firelight. The first coyote stepped closer. Ashen growled, not loud, but deep. A sound that spoke of age and war and blood remembered. The second coyote hesitated. The third snarled and lunged forward. Ashen met it mid-stride. The fight was fast and raw. claws and fangs a flurry of motion. Ashen drove the attacker back, then turned to face the second. They circled. Time stretched and bent. Delilah raised the flare and fired. The red light screamed upward, exploding in the sky. The coyotes flinched, and the rest of the pack, hiding in the dark, vanished into the brush. Ashen didn't chase. He couldn't. He staggered back to Bramble's side, his sides heaving. Blood trickled from a shallow cut along his leg. He lay down, his body curling toward the foal, eyes still open, breath ragged but steady. The foal stirred at the noise, his ears flicking once. Then slowly Bramble's head turned. He reached his muzzle toward the wolf and gently touched the tip of Ashen's ear with his tongue. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. But it stopped the world around them. Dr. Sato whispered, "Did he just—" "Yes," Delilah said, her voice catching. He thanked him. Cody turned away to wipe his face. "This isn't behavior," he murmured. "This is something else." Delilah pulled her camera from her bag. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steadied them. She had filmed much of the confrontation. She zoomed in now, catching the final frame of the wolf and the foal curled together like kin. Glenn used to say she murmured more to herself than anyone else. Not all instincts are about taking life. Some are about keeping it. Dr. Sato gave her a look, curious, quiet. "My husband," Delilah added. "He died doing this kind of work. But he always believed animals felt more than we gave them credit for." She didn't elaborate. As the fire cracked and the night deepened, the team worked in silence. Cody prepared hot compresses. Dr. Sato administered antibiotics to prevent infection. Delilah remained near the wolf and foal, keeping watch with a gaze more maternal than scientific. Just before dawn, a vehicle approached from the south, a four-wheel rescue unit from the Bureau of Land Management. From it stepped Franklin Miles, a field officer with graying temples and thick arms, dressed in a khaki uniform and thick-soled boots. He was in his 60s, calm and deliberate in movement, carrying both authority and quiet compassion. Roan he greeted with a nod. "I got your report. Didn't think you were serious." "I'm not sure I believe it either," Delilah admitted. "But it's real." Franklin looked at Ashen, then at Bramble. "I'll call in a sling transport for the foal. He can't make the hike out." "We'll go with him," Cody said. Franklin glanced toward the wolf. "What about him?" Delilah hesitated. "He stays. For now." Franklin gave a slow nod. "I'll keep it off the report. Thank you." By the time the sun rose, Bramble was being lifted gently onto a sling stretcher, wrapped in warm blankets, and connected to portable fluid packs. Ashen remained curled in the same place, eyes closed, but ears still twitching. When the foal was secured and rolled past, Ashen opened his eyes briefly. The old wolf watched the colt disappear into the light. Then he laid his head back on his paws, his job at least for the moment done. The rescue center on the outskirts of Grand Junction sat tucked between low mesas and stretches of sun-dried plains. From the air, it looked like a series of modest buildings wrapped in fencing and shade structures, but at ground level it breathed purpose: grazing paddocks, rehabilitation stalls, observation decks, and in one quiet corner, a pen unlike any other. Bramble had been there for 2 weeks. The young Mustang had recovered faster than anyone dared to hope. His coat had regained its caramel sheen, and though he remained lean, his legs had grown steadier beneath him. He pranced when the wind blew, nibbled at fresh hay, and eyed visitors with the boldness of youth. But even with his strength returning, he remained tethered to one place, the far end of his paddock, where he could see the wolf. Ashen had his own enclosure across a narrow footpath. Surrounded by reinforced fencing and shaded by a juniper tree, it had been modified to suit his age. The ground was soft-packed, the water trough always fresh, and a small platform overlooked Bramble's side of the center. The old wolf spent most of his days there, lying on the platform, head resting between his paws. Watching. They never touched. Never called to each other in ways humans understood. but anyone who observed them felt the same truth. There was a thread between them. A recognition that had not dulled with distance or safety. Delilah Roan visited often, her boots worn smooth from pacing the gravel paths. She kept a journal of their interactions, not just for science, but for something more personal. She never said what, though Cody suspected it had something to do with Glenn, the husband she still spoke of in present tense. Dr. Evelyn Sato now oversaw Ashen's medical care. She had grown quiet over the past week, less skeptical, more thoughtful. She often stood at the wolf's enclosure watching him watch the horse. "They don't behave like this in the wild," she murmured once. Delilah had replied softly, "They're not in the wild anymore." That morning, as sunlight spilled over the foothills, Bramble bolted awake from a deep sleep, his body tense, nostrils flaring. The night cameras later confirmed he'd had a nightmare, legs kicking, eyes wide open, heart racing. Within moments, Ashen stirred on his platform, climbed down carefully, and walked to the fence. He didn't howl or bark. He just lay there, and Bramble calmed. Later that week, Delilah prepared a presentation for the center's board, a mix of scientists, conservation advocates, and government stakeholders. She had prepared her data carefully, video documentation, journal entries, behavioral logs. But the core of her message wasn't numbers. It was meaning. "They shouldn't be friends," she said as footage played behind her. "But they are." She paused, then continued. "We don't need to interpret it through our lens. They're not pretending to be anything. They're just choosing not to be enemies." The room fell silent. As the final clip played, Ashen licking the dust from Bramble's muzzle in the canyon. A vote was held. Unanimous. Funding was approved for a permanent sanctuary space. A new name was suggested, Ashen's Rest, a place where predator and prey could retire not as exhibits, but as living proof of something more powerful than instinct. 2 nights before construction began, the alarm triggered. At 2:47 a.m., a motion sensor picked up movement at the south gate. A truck, 2 masked men, a set of bolt cutters. They didn't go for the wolves. They went for the Mustang. Bramble didn't scream. He didn't resist. They sedated him fast and loaded him into a trailer parked just outside the camera's range. The whole thing took under 4 minutes, but they hadn't counted on Ashen. The cameras caught it all. The moment Bramble was pulled from the paddock, Ashen threw himself against the gate of his enclosure once, twice, until a corner latch snapped loose. Blood streaked the side of his ribs. Still, he ran, an old wolf with scarred hips and a crooked tooth sprinting across asphalt and sagebrush. He followed the truck tracks with stunning precision. It took the search team an hour to find them, delayed by locked gates and false trails. When they reached the abandoned trailer, Bramble stood inside, wide-eyed but uninjured. Ashen lay outside, panting heavily. A gash ran down his foreleg. He had faced the thieves and chased them off somehow. The story made headlines by sunrise. "Old Wolf saves Mustang again," one read. "Predator turned guardian," said another. Delilah didn't respond to media requests. But she posted a single photo to the center's page, Ashen and Bramble both resting side by side in recovery, their bodies touching for the first time since the canyon. Within hours, donations poured in. A month later, Ashen's Rest opened its gates. 50 acres of protected land, part wilderness, part care facility. Wild animals who couldn't return to the wild now had a place between worlds. Bramble was its first resident, Ashen its quiet founder. Visitors came from across the country, not to gawk, but to witness. Children stood by the observation deck and watched as the Mustang grazed near the wolf. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right, Ashen would rise and walk to the edge of his pen, and Bramble would lift his head and step closer. They didn't nuzzle. They didn't play. They simply stood. Together. At the sanctuary's dedication ceremony, Delilah stood before a small crowd. Her voice was calm but filled with weight. "We don't have to be the same to understand each other," she said. We just have to know pain and choose love over destruction. She paused, looking out at Ashen resting in the shade. He didn't change who he was. He just chose what to protect. Behind her, Bramble flicked his tail and returned to grazing. And the wind, as if in agreement, whispered through the cottonwoods. Sometimes the most powerful bonds are not formed by blood or spoken language, but by the quiet choice to stand beside someone when the world turns away. Ashen and Bramble were never meant to be friends. One was born to hunt, the other to flee. But they proved that even the oldest instincts can be rewritten by something deeper: compassion. In our daily lives, we meet people different from us. People who don't speak like us, look like us, or live like us. But when we choose to protect, to understand, or simply to be there, we become part of something greater than ourselves. So today, ask yourself, will you choose fear or will you choose kindness? If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment to tell us what moment stayed with you most. And don't forget to subscribe for more true animal stories that remind us what it means to be human.